The moment Ethan Miles caught a collapsing pregnant woman at a stranger's funeral, he had no idea his life was about to explode into something unimaginable. $500 million, a fortune left by a dead billionaire he couldn't even remember meeting. But here's the twist. This wasn't luck. This was a test. And Ethan had just passed it without knowing he was being watched. Before we dive into how a broke single dad working graveyard shifts became the most unlikely heir in history, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels, and buckle up, because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. The sky hung low and gray over Riverside Memorial Cemetery that Tuesday morning, the kind of oppressive autumn overcast that made everything feel heavier than it should. Ethan Miles stood at the edge of the grounds, near the maintenance shed tucked behind a row of ancient oak trees, watching the funeral procession wind its way toward the Whitlock family plot. He wasn't supposed to be watching. He was supposed to be working, trimming hedges, raking leaves, keeping his head down and his hands busy like he'd done for the past 3 years since taking this job. But something about this particular funeral made him pause. Maybe it was the sheer number of luxury cars snaking through the cemetery gates. Mercedes, Bentleys, even a Rolls-Royce that looked like it cost more than Ethan would earn in 10 lifetimes. Or maybe it was the coldness he sensed even from a distance, the way the mourners clustered in their designer black attire, checking phones, barely looking at the mahogany casket being carried toward the gravesite. Ethan pulled his worn work gloves tighter and returned to the hedge he'd been trimming, the electric shears buzzing rhythmically in his hands. The funeral wasn't his business. Rich people dying and leaving behind other rich people to fight over their money. That was a world so far removed from his reality that it might as well have been happening on another planet. His reality was the $23 in his checking account, the overdue electric bill sitting on his kitchen counter, the way his 7-year-old son Leo's shoes were getting too small, the soles wearing thin, but new ones would have to wait until next month's paycheck. His reality was mac and cheese 4 nights a week, double shifts whenever he could get them, and the constant gnawing anxiety that one unexpected expense, one broken-down car, one emergency room visit, would send their whole fragile life tumbling into chaos. The shears bit into another branch, and Ethan focused on the familiar rhythm of the work. Trim, step, trim, step. Don't think about what you can't control. Don't think about tomorrow. Just get through today. Excuse me? The voice was soft, uncertain. Ethan looked up to find a young woman standing a few feet away, her hand resting protectively on her visibly pregnant belly. She looked to be in her late 20s, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun and a black dress that, while expensive-looking, somehow seemed out of place on her, like she was wearing someone else's clothes. Her face was pale, drawn with exhaustion or grief, or both. "Yes, ma'am?" Ethan set down the shears and pulled off his gloves. "I'm sorry to bother you, but is there a restroom nearby, or any place I could sit down for a moment?" Her voice wavered slightly, and Ethan noticed the way she was gripping her stomach, the slight sway in her posture. "The main building's locked right now, but there's a bench just around that corner." Ethan gestured toward a shaded area near the meditation garden. "You okay? You need some water?" "I just need to sit," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, Ethan saw the color drain completely from her face. His body moved before his mind caught up, pure instinct, the same reflexes that had made him dive into a freezing river to pull out a drowning dog last winter, that had him running toward danger instead of away from it every time. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, reaching her just as her knees buckled. "Whoa, hey, I got you," Ethan said, catching her under the arms as she collapsed forward. She wasn't heavy, too light, actually, her frame fragile despite the pregnancy, but the momentum nearly sent them both tumbling to the grass. Ethan braced his feet and managed to steady them both, then carefully lowered her to sit on the ground, supporting her back against his knee. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her head lolling to the side. "I'm so sorry. I can't. Don't apologize. Just breathe, okay? Nice and slow." Ethan looked around frantically. The funeral procession was maybe 50 yards away, a sea of black-clad figures gathered around the gravesite. Surely someone had noticed. Surely someone was coming to help. But no one moved. No one even looked in their direction. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before. The way wealthy people could look straight through working-class folks like they were invisible. The way they'd step over a homeless person sleeping on the sidewalk without breaking stride. But this was different. This woman was clearly one of them, dressed in expensive clothes, probably here for the same funeral. And they were just ignoring her. "Stay with me," Ethan said firmly, shifting so he could better support her weight. "I'm going to get you some water. Can you hold yourself up for just a second?" She nodded weakly, and Ethan gently leaned her against the trunk of the nearest oak tree. He sprinted to the maintenance shed, grabbed his water bottle, still half full, thankfully, and a clean rag from his supplies. When he returned, less than 30 seconds later, she hadn't moved. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and rapid. Ethan unscrewed the water bottle and knelt beside her. "Here," he said gently, holding the bottle to her lips. "Just small sips." She drank, coughing slightly, and some color began returning to her cheeks. Ethan dampened the rag and pressed it carefully to her forehead, then the back of her neck. His ex-wife had been pregnant once, years ago, a pregnancy that ended in heartbreak at 12 weeks. But he remembered how she'd suffered from dizzy spells, how the heat and stress could overwhelm her in seconds. "That's it," he murmured. "You're doing great. Just keep breathing." Gradually her breathing steadied, her eyes fluttered open, a striking hazel green rimmed with red from crying. She looked at Ethan with something like confusion, as if she couldn't quite process why this stranger in dirt-stained work clothes was kneeling beside her, taking care of her. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what happened. I was fine, and then suddenly—" "When's the last time you ate?" Ethan asked. She blinked. Yesterday morning, I think." "And you're how far along?" 7 months. Ethan shook his head, not in judgment, but in understanding. Grief did strange things to people, made them forget to take care of themselves, made the basic acts of living, eating, sleeping, breathing, feel impossible. "I've got a granola bar in my truck," he said. "It's not much, but—" "No, please, you've already done so much." She tried to push herself up, but Ethan gently pressed her shoulder. "Sit for another minute. Let your blood pressure stabilize." He glanced toward the funeral again. The service was in full swing now, a minister's voice carrying faintly across the grass. Still, no one had come looking for her. "You here for the Whitlock funeral?" Her expression crumbled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, Rowan was—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Ethan didn't push. He simply stayed beside her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder in silent support, the other holding the damp rag ready in case she needed it again. They sat like that for several minutes, the world continuing around them. The minister's eulogy floating on the breeze, the distant rumble of traffic from the main road, a crow cawing from somewhere in the oak trees. Finally, she wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "I should go back. They'll be wondering where I am." Ethan wanted to point out that clearly no one was wondering, no one had even bothered to check, but he kept that observation to himself. Instead, he helped her carefully to her feet, staying close in case she wobbled again. "Take it slow," he advised. "And please, eat something as soon as you can. For the baby." She nodded, then looked at him with an intensity that caught him off guard. "What's your name?" "Ethan." "Ethan Miles?" "Ava Hollis." She extended her hand and they shook, her grip surprisingly firm despite everything. "Thank you, Ethan. You have no idea. Thank you. Just glad you're okay." Ava hesitated as if she wanted to say something more, but then seemed to think better of it. She gave him one last grateful look before turning and walking slowly back toward the funeral gathering. Ethan watched her go, making sure she made it safely to the cluster of mourners before returning to his abandoned hedge trimmers. As he worked, he couldn't shake the image of her face. The grief etched into every feature, the way she'd looked so utterly alone despite being surrounded by dozens of people. He wondered who Rowan Whitlock had been to her. Father? Grandfather? The name sounded vaguely familiar, like something he might have seen in a newspaper headline once, but Ethan didn't follow the lives of the rich and famous. He had enough trouble keeping track of his own life. The funeral concluded about an hour later. Ethan kept working, staying out of sight as the mourners filed back to their expensive cars. He caught glimpses of them through the hedges. A tall woman with severe features and a black hat, speaking sharply into her phone. A younger man, probably in his 30s, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. An elderly couple moving slowly, leaning on each other. And Ava, trailing behind everyone, one hand still resting on her belly, looking back at the grave one final time before climbing into a waiting town car. By 3 o'clock, the cemetery was empty again except for the grounds crew. Ethan finished his shift, packed up his tools, and headed to the parking lot where his 15-year-old Honda sat rusting quietly in the afternoon sun. The drive home took 20 minutes, through neighborhoods that got progressively more run down until he pulled up in front of the small duplex he rented on Maple Street. It wasn't much: 2 cramped bedrooms, a kitchen where the linoleum was peeling, a bathroom where the toilet ran constantly, no matter how many times Ethan tried to fix it. But the landlord was decent. The neighborhood was safe enough, and most importantly, it was home. It was where Leo's drawings covered the refrigerator, where they'd marked his height on the doorframe every birthday, where they'd built blanket forts and played board games and learned to be a family of 2 instead of 3. Ethan unlocked the door and stepped inside to find his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, sitting on the couch reading a magazine while Leo sprawled on the floor, coloring intently. "Daddy!" Leo jumped up and barreled into Ethan's legs, wrapping his arms around his father's waist. "Hey, buddy!" Ethan lifted his son up, groaning exaggeratedly. "When did you get so heavy? You're like 1,000,000 pounds." Leo giggled. "I'm only 73 pounds. We measured at school." 73? No way. You must have rocks in your pockets." "Daddy, I don't have pockets." Ethan set him down and turned to Mrs. Chen, who was already gathering her things. "Thank you so much for watching him. I know I said I'd be back by 2. No problem at all," Mrs. Chen said warmly. She was in her 70s, a retired school teacher who'd lived next door for 30 years and treated Leo like the grandson she'd never had. He was perfect, as always. We practiced his spelling words. "I got them all right," Leo announced proudly. "Of course you did." Ethan pulled out his wallet and extracted 3 $20 bills. Money he really couldn't spare, but Mrs. Chen refused to watch Leo for free, and Ethan refused to take advantage of her kindness. "Ethan, that's too much." "It's exactly right," he said firmly, pressing the bills into her hand. "Thank you, really." After Mrs. Chen left, Ethan surveyed the kitchen and made a command decision. "Mac and cheese night?" "Again?" Leo wrinkled his nose, but there was no real complaint in his voice. He was used to their limited menu. "Hey, I make the best mac and cheese in the state. That's a scientific fact." "What about the whole country?" "Well, I don't want to brag." They fell into their evening routine, Ethan boiling water while Leo set the table, both of them talking about their days. Leo told him about science class, where they'd learned about the solar system, and about how his friend Marcus had gotten in trouble for throwing erasers. Ethan listened, asking questions, laughing at the right moments, letting the simple normalcy of it wash away the stress of the day. He didn't mention the funeral, didn't mention the pregnant woman he'd helped. These small moments of peace with his son were too precious to contaminate with the reminder of how fragile everything was, how close they always were to falling apart. They just sat down to eat, cheap powdered cheese coating their elbows as they laughed over something silly, when 3 sharp knocks echoed from the front door. Ethan's smile faded. It was nearly 7 o'clock on a Tuesday. They weren't expecting anyone, and unannounced visitors rarely brought good news. His mind immediately jumped to worst-case scenarios. The landlord coming to raise the rent, someone from the electric company about the overdue bill, maybe even a social worker checking up on them after that incident at Leo's school last year where a teacher had reported concerns about his worn-out clothes. "Stay here, buddy," Ethan said, standing and moving toward the door. Through the peephole, he saw a man in an expensive gray suit, mid-50s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Definitely not the landlord, definitely not anyone Ethan recognized. He opened the door but left the chain lock engaged. "Can I help you?" The man smiled professionally. "Mr. Ethan Miles?" "Who's asking?" "My name is Grant Hale. I'm an attorney with Whitlock Estate Management." He pulled out a business card and held it up to the crack in the door. The card was heavy stock, embossed lettering. I apologize for arriving unannounced, but the matter is quite urgent. May I come in? Every instinct in Ethan's body screamed that this was wrong. Rich people's lawyers didn't show up at poor people's apartments with urgent business unless that business was bad. Had he done something wrong at the cemetery? Had someone complained about him talking to Ava? Mr. Miles, I promise you, you're not in any trouble, Grant said, as if reading his mind. Quite the opposite, in fact. But what I need to discuss with you is sensitive, and best done in private. Ethan glanced back at Leo, who was watching from the table with wide, curious eyes. Leo, go to your room for a few minutes, okay? But Dad! Now, please. Leo trudged off, and Ethan heard his bedroom door close. Only then did he unlatch the chain and open the door fully. Grant Hale stepped inside, and his gaze swept across the modest living room. Not judgmental exactly, but definitely assessing. Cataloging the worn furniture, the water stain on the ceiling, the stack of past due bills on the counter that Ethan hadn't gotten around to hiding. Would you like to sit down, Mr. Miles? I think I'd rather hear what this is about first. Grant nodded slowly, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. Mr. Miles, are you familiar with Rowan Whitlock? Ethan's stomach dropped. So this was about the funeral, about helping Ava. Maybe the Whitlock family thought he'd been inappropriate, or maybe I worked the funeral this morning, Ethan said carefully. At Riverside Memorial. I'm on the grounds crew. If someone complained about something I did, no one complained, Grant interrupted gently. Mr. Miles, Rowan Whitlock passed away 5 days ago. He was 83 years old, one of the wealthiest men in the state, founder of Whitlock Industries, philanthropist, and, well, by most accounts, a complicated man. Okay, I'm sorry for his family's loss, but I don't understand what this has to do with me. Grant set his briefcase down and held up the folder. 3 years ago, Mr. Whitlock updated his will. It was an unusual document, one that his children and his lawyers all tried to talk him out of, but he was very clear about what he wanted. Mr. Hale, he left you his entire fortune, Mr. Miles. The words hung in the air like something solid, something Ethan could almost reach out and touch. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His brain seemed to have short-circuited, unable to process the sentence he'd just heard. I'm sorry, what? Rowan Whitlock's estate, his primary fortune, his investments, his property holdings, all of it has been left to you. The total value is approximately $500 million. The room tilted. Ethan reached out blindly and found the back of the couch, gripping it hard enough that his knuckles went white. 500 million. That wasn't a number that existed in his reality. That wasn't real money. That was movie money, lottery money, the kind of number that got thrown around in news articles about tech billionaires and oil tycoons. That's not possible, Ethan said, his voice coming out hoarse. I don't know anyone named Rowan Whitlock. I've never even heard that name before today. Yes, well, that's part of why this is so remarkable. Grant opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. Do you recognize this man? Ethan took the photo with shaking hands. It showed an elderly man with white hair and kind eyes, dressed in a simple sweater, sitting in what looked like a library. Ethan stared at the image, willing his memory to produce something, anything. But there was nothing. He'd never seen this man before in his life. No, he said firmly. I've never met him. Are you certain? Perhaps 5 years ago, in November, there was a fire at a parking garage downtown. And suddenly, like a door opening in his mind, Ethan remembered. It had been late, past midnight, and he'd been finishing up his janitorial shift at the Grant Tower office building. He'd been walking to his car when he'd heard the explosion, a dull boom that echoed off the concrete walls. Then screaming. Ethan had run toward the sound instead of away from it, finding a car engulfed in flames near the garage's exit. The driver's door was jammed, and through the smoke, he could see someone slumped over the steering wheel. He'd grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, smashed the passenger window, pulled himself inside despite the heat and smoke, and dragged the unconscious man out. By the time the fire department arrived, Ethan had already performed CPR, getting the man breathing again. The paramedics had taken over, loaded the man into an ambulance, and Ethan had given his statement to the police. Then he'd clocked back in to finish mopping the floors because he couldn't afford to lose those hours of pay. "That was him?" Ethan whispered. "The man in the car?" "That was him," Grant confirmed. "You saved Rowan Whitlock's life that night, Mr. Miles, and then you simply left. You didn't ask for a reward, didn't give the media interviews, you just went back to work. I didn't even know who he was. He was just someone who needed help." "Yes, and that, Mr. Miles, is precisely why you're standing here now." Grant pulled out another document, this one several pages long. "After that night, Mr. Whitlock became interested in you. Not in an invasive way. He was very careful about respecting your privacy, but he kept track of you. He learned about your life, your struggles, the kind of man you are." Ethan felt sick. "He was watching me?" "He was observing you," Grant corrected gently. "He learned that you're a single father raising your son alone after your wife passed away. He learned that you work 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep a roof over your heads. He learned that you volunteer at the veterans shelter on your days off, that you fixed your elderly neighbor's plumbing for free, that you give money to homeless people even when you can barely afford groceries, that you're raising your son to be kind, to be honest, to be good. People do those things every day," Ethan protested. "That doesn't make me special. That doesn't make me worth $500 million. Mr. Whitlock disagreed. He believed you represented something rare, genuine, selfless goodness. And more than that, he believed you would know what to do with his fortune in a way his own children never could." "His children, Jesus, his children. They must be losing their minds." Grant's expression tightened slightly. "Cassandra and Archer Whitlock are displeased, yes. The will makes provisions for them. They'll each receive $20 million, which is not insignificant, but the bulk of the estate goes to you." Ethan's legs gave out, and he sank onto the couch. His mind was racing, trying to catch up, trying to make sense of this. "Why?" he asked. "Why me? Why not give it to charity? Why not his kids? I don't understand." "There's one more thing," Grant said quietly. He pulled out a small flash drive. "Mr. Whitlock recorded a video message for you. With your permission, I'd like to show it to you now." Ethan could only nod. Grant pulled out a laptop, inserted the drive, and turned the screen toward Ethan. After a moment, the video began to play. Rowan Whitlock sat in the same library from the photograph, but he looked older, frailer. The video had clearly been recorded recently, perhaps only days before his death. When he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "Hello, Ethan. If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and you're probably very confused right now. Let me see if I can help with that. 5 years ago, you saved my life without knowing who I was. You risked your own life, actually. The fire marshal's report said the car could have exploded at any moment. You could have died, but you didn't hesitate. And then when it was over, you simply went back to work. You didn't look for recognition or reward. You just moved on. That intrigued me. So I learned more about you, and what I learned broke my heart and filled it at the same time. Broke it because I saw how hard you struggle, how much you sacrifice for your son. Filled it because I saw the kind of man you are, the kind of man I always wanted to be but never quite managed. I built an empire, Ethan. I made billions, but I was never good at the things that matter. I was a terrible father. I was cold, distant, focused on profit margins instead of people. My children grew up resenting me, and honestly, they had every right to. I gave them money but never love. I gave them everything except what they actually needed. And then I met Ava. She was my executive assistant's daughter, and she was brilliant and kind and everything my own children weren't, not because they couldn't be, but because I'd never taught them how. I came to love Ava like a daughter. And when I watched you help her at my funeral today, yes, that was planned, though the collapse was real. She's been under terrible stress. I knew I'd made the right choice. This isn't just about giving you money, Ethan. It's about giving you the power to do good on a scale you've never imagined. To help people the way you helped me, the way you help everyone around you. To show my children what real character looks like. To prove that kindness isn't weakness, and that the measure of a man isn't in his bank account, but in his heart. I know this is overwhelming. I know you're probably terrified. But I believe in you. I believe you'll do something beautiful with this gift. And I really hope, that you'll help my children see what I couldn't teach them myself. Thank you, Ethan, for saving my life, for being exactly who you are, and for giving an old man hope in his final days that maybe, just maybe, goodness still wins sometimes. The video ended. Ethan sat frozen, tears streaming down his face without him even realizing he was crying. His chest felt tight, his throat closed with emotion he couldn't name. This stranger, this billionaire who'd spent 5 years watching him from afar, had seen something in him that Ethan had never seen in himself. There's a condition, Grant said softly. The inheritance only transfers if, on the day of the funeral, you performed an act of selfless kindness in the presence of Ava Hollis, which you did when you helped her after she collapsed. That was a test? That was verification, Mr. Whitlock needed to know that his assessment of your character was correct, that even 5 years later, you were still the same man who'd pulled him from a burning car. Ethan wiped his eyes roughly. And if I'd walked past her, if I hadn't helped, then the entire fortune would have gone to charity, and you never would have known any of this. Maybe that would have been better. Would it? Grant closed his laptop and looked at Ethan intently. Mr. Miles, I've been an estate attorney for 30 years. I've seen fortunes passed down to children who squander them, to spouses who were never really loved, to institutions that use the money for everything except what the donor intended. But this is different. This is a man who found someone he believed in and decided to take a chance on basic human decency. That's rare. That's worth protecting. His children are going to destroy me, Ethan said hollowly. People like me we don't get $500 million. They'll say I manipulated him or pressured him or the will is ironclad, Grant interrupted firmly. Mr. Whitlock anticipated every objection. He underwent a full psychological evaluation to prove his competence. He documented everything, every observation about you, every reason for his decision. Cassandra and Archer can contest it if they want, but they won't win. The only question is whether you accept it. Ethan looked around his shabby living room, at the couch with the broken spring, at the TV with the cracked screen that they'd bought used 3 years ago, at the photos of Leo that covered every surface because they were the one thing that made this place feel like home. And he thought about the bills on the counter, the debt, the fear that never quite went away, the knowledge that one medical emergency could destroy everything. And he thought about Leo, 7 years old, who deserved new shoes and art classes and maybe, just maybe, a life where his father didn't look quite so tired all the time. If I say yes, Ethan said slowly, what happens next? Grant allowed himself a small smile. Then, Mr. Miles, your life changes forever. And if I may say so, it couldn't happen to a better person. Outside, the evening darkened into night, and inside the small duplex on Maple Street, Ethan Miles sat with the weight of an impossible decision, wondering how he'd become the guardian of a dead billionaire's dream. From his bedroom, he could hear Leo singing softly to himself, and Ethan closed his eyes, sending up a silent prayer to whatever power might be listening. Please help me do this right. Because ready or not, everything had just changed. The first week after Grant Hale's visit passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and sleepless nights. Ethan had signed the initial documents with trembling hands, his signature looking foreign and shaky on the expensive legal paper. Grant had been patient, walking him through every clause, every stipulation, every legal safeguard that Rowan Whitlock had put in place. The money wouldn't transfer immediately. There were procedures, protocols, a waiting period mandated by law. But it was real. It was happening. And Ethan felt like he was drowning. He'd taken 3 days off work, claiming a family emergency, which wasn't entirely a lie. Mrs. Chen watched Leo without asking questions, though her concerned glances suggested she knew something was wrong. Ethan couldn't tell her, couldn't tell anyone. Grant had advised discretion until the legal processes were complete, and even beyond that, Ethan had no idea how to explain this to the people in his life. Hey, so remember how I was broke last week? Well, funny story. I inherited $500 million from a dead billionaire I didn't know I'd saved. It sounded insane, even in his own head. On the 8th day, Grant called. "Mr. Miles, I need you to come to my office this afternoon. There's someone who wants to meet you." "Who?" "Ava Hollis. She's been asking about you. I think it would be beneficial for you both to talk." Ethan's first instinct was to refuse. He wasn't ready. He didn't know what to say to her. But Grant's tone suggested this wasn't really a request. So at 2 o'clock, Ethan found himself walking into the gleaming glass tower that housed Whitlock Estate Management, feeling profoundly out of place in his cleanest pair of jeans and a button-down shirt he'd ironed twice. The receptionist directed him to a conference room on the 14th floor. Through the glass walls, he could see Ava already seated, staring out the window at the city below. She looked better than she had at the funeral. More color in her face, less of that haunted exhaustion. But when she turned and saw him, her eyes filled with tears. "Ethan," she said, standing awkwardly with her hand on her belly, "thank you for coming." "Of course." He stepped inside and they stood there for a moment, neither quite sure what to do. Finally, Ava moved forward and hugged him, or tried to. Her pregnant belly made it awkward, but the gesture was genuine, her arms tight around his shoulders. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry he put this on you without warning." "You knew?" Ethan pulled back, searching her face. "You knew what he was going to do?" "Not everything, not the specifics." Ava sank back into her chair and Ethan took the seat across from her. "But Rowan told me months ago that he'd found someone who reminded him of the man he'd wished he'd been. He wouldn't tell me who, only that when the time came, I'd understand." "At the funeral," Ethan said slowly, "when you collapsed, was that really—" "The stress was real, the grief was real. I loved him so much." Her voice broke, and she pressed her hand to her mouth. "But, yes, he'd asked me to be there, to see what you would do. He said if you helped me, if you showed the same kindness he'd seen in you before, then he'd know for certain." Ethan felt a flash of anger. "So I was being tested? Like some kind of experiment?" "No," Ava said firmly. "Not tested. Observed. There's a difference. Rowan didn't set up some elaborate trap. He just created an opportunity for you to be yourself. And you were. You were exactly who he believed you to be. I don't know if that makes it better or worse." "I know it's overwhelming. Believe me, I know." Ava wiped her eyes. "Rowan came into my life when I was 19. My mother worked as his executive assistant, and I was in college, struggling to pay tuition. He offered to help, and I was too proud to accept at first. But he was persistent. Not in a creepy way. He was just genuinely interested in who I was, what I wanted to do with my life. He became like a father to me, the father I'd never had." "What about his real children?" Ava's expression darkened. "Cassandra and Archer. They're not bad people, not really, but they're broken in ways that Rowan blamed himself for. He was so focused on building his empire when they were young that he barely knew them, and by the time he tried to fix it, the damage was done. They grew up believing that money was the only thing that mattered, that love was transactional, that power was the only currency worth having. And now they're going to hate me for taking what they think is theirs." "They already do," Ava admitted. "Grant's been fielding calls from their lawyers all week. They're threatening to contest the will, to drag this through court for years if they have to. But Ethan, you need to understand something. Rowan knew this would happen. He knew they'd react this way. And he believed you were strong enough to handle it." "I'm not strong," Ethan said quietly. "I'm terrified. I have a 7-year-old son who's already been through too much. I can't put him through a media circus, a legal battle with billionaires. Maybe it would be better if I just walked away." "You can't." Ava leaned forward, her gaze intense. "The will is structured so that if you refuse the inheritance, it all goes to charity. Cassandra and Archer get nothing beyond their initial $20 million each. If you walk away, you're not protecting them or yourself. You're just letting Rowan's dream die." "What dream? What did he actually want me to do with this money?" "He wanted you to prove that kindness matters, that goodness isn't naive or weak, that one person with integrity can make a real difference." Ava pulled an envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. "He left this for you. Another message. I was supposed to give it to you when you started to doubt." Ethan stared at the envelope like it might bite him. His name was written on the front in shaky handwriting, Rowan's, presumably. With trembling fingers, he opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Ethan, if Ava is giving you this, then you're thinking about walking away. I understand. This is too much, too fast, too heavy. You didn't ask for this burden, but let me tell you a story. When I was 35, I had the chance to help a young engineer who'd come to me with a revolutionary idea. He had no money, no connections, just brilliance and passion. I could have invested in him, could have changed both our lives. But I was too focused on my own projects, too busy, too convinced that I didn't have time for his dreams. That engineer was James Morrison. You might recognize the name. He founded Morrison Tech, changed the world of renewable energy, saved countless lives. He did it without my help, and every time I saw his face in the news, I was reminded of my own smallness, my own fear. I don't want you to make my mistake, Ethan. I don't want you to let fear convince you that you're not capable of extraordinary things, because you are. You already have been, every single day of your life. You just didn't have the resources to match your heart. Now you do. Don't walk away. Don't let my children's anger or your own fear stop you from becoming who you were always meant to be. Trust yourself. Trust me. Rowan. Ethan read the letter 3 times, his vision blurring with tears he couldn't quite blink away. When he finally looked up, Ava was watching him with something like hope in her eyes. He really believed in me, Ethan whispered. I don't know why, but he did. Because you gave him something to believe in. At the end of his life, when he was looking back on all his choices, all his mistakes, you showed him that people like you still exist. That was a gift, Ethan. Maybe the last real gift anyone gave him. They talked for another hour, Ava sharing stories about Rowan, his dry humor, his late-night philosophy discussions, his secret love of terrible action movies. By the time Ethan left the office, some of his terror had transformed into something else. Not quite confidence, but maybe determination, maybe purpose. He picked up Leo from school that afternoon, and they went to the park like they did every Friday when Ethan wasn't working. They threw a frisbee, ate ice cream from the truck, sat on the swings as the sun started to set. Leo chattered about his week, about his friend Marcus, about the girl in his class who could do a backflip. Normal kid stuff. Beautiful, ordinary life. Dad? Leo asked as they walked home, his small hand in Ethan's. Are you okay? You seem sad. Not sad, buddy. Just thinking. About what? About how lucky I am to have you. Leo grinned, gap-toothed and perfect. That's a weird thing to think about. Yeah, well, I'm a weird dad. The weirdest, Leo agreed happily. That night, after Leo was asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and started researching. He read about Rowan Whitlock, about his rise from middle-class roots to becoming one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. He read about Whitlock Industries, about the controversies and the triumphs, about the man who'd been brilliant and driven, and by most accounts, cold. He read about Cassandra and Archer, about their own business ventures, their public feuds, their complicated relationship with their father. And he read about the fire 5 years ago. There were news articles, brief mentions buried in the back pages. Elderly businessman saved from parking garage fire by unknown hero. Rowan Whitlock, 78, treated for smoke inhalation and released. No mention of Ethan's name. He'd been invisible then, just as he'd always been. But not anymore. The knock came on Sunday morning while Ethan was making pancakes and Leo was watching cartoons. This time, Ethan knew it wouldn't be good news, even before he opened the door. 2 people stood on his doorstep. The woman was tall, striking, in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back severely and a black coat that probably cost more than Ethan's car. The man beside her was younger, mid-30s, with the same sharp features and an expression of barely contained fury. Ethan Miles? The woman said, her voice cold and precise. Yes? I'm Cassandra Whitlock. This is my brother Archer. We need to talk about what you've stolen from us. Ethan's stomach dropped, but he kept his voice steady. I haven't stolen anything. Really? Cassandra's laugh was bitter. You manipulated our father, preyed on a sick old man's guilt and nostalgia, and convinced him to disinherit his own children. If that's not theft, I don't know what is. I never even met your father. Not consciously. I had no idea who he was When you what? Archer stepped forward, his jaw tight. When you oh so conveniently saved his life? When you played the humble hero? Do you have any idea how suspicious that looks? Dad? Leo's voice came from behind Ethan, small and worried. What's going on? Cassandra's gaze shifted to Leo, and something flickered in her expression, not quite sympathy, but close. You have a son. Yes, and I need you both to leave, now. We're not going anywhere, Archer said, not until we've made something very clear. You don't deserve that money. You didn't earn it, and we're going to fight this will with everything we have. When we're done, you'll wish you'd never heard the Whitlock name. Is that a threat? It's a promise, Cassandra said softly. You're in way over your head, Mr. Miles, and you're going to drown. They turned and walked away, climbing into a black Mercedes that Ethan hadn't noticed parked at the curb. He stood frozen in the doorway until they drove off, then closed the door and locked it, his hands shaking. Dad? Leo was still standing in the living room, his eyes wide. Who were those people? No one, buddy. Just no one. But that night, lying awake in bed, Ethan knew that was a lie. They were very much someone, and they were coming for him. The next morning, Ethan dropped Leo at school and drove to Grant Hale's office without an appointment. The receptionist tried to stop him, but Grant emerged from a meeting when he heard Ethan's voice raised in the lobby. Mr. Miles, what's wrong? They came to my house, Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. Cassandra and Archer. They threatened me in front of my son. Grant's expression hardened. Come with me. They went to his office, and Grant immediately picked up his phone, making 3 calls in rapid succession. When he hung up, he looked at Ethan seriously. I'm getting a restraining order filed today. They can't contact you directly anymore. All communication goes through lawyers. They said they're going to destroy me. They're going to try. But Ethan, you need to understand something. They're desperate. They spent their entire lives believing that money would eventually be theirs. Now it's not, and they're lashing out. But the will is solid. The only way they win is if you give up. I have a 7-year-old son, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I can't let him get hurt because of this. Last night, he had nightmares. He woke up crying, asking if those people were going to take me away. They're not. I won't let that happen. You can't promise that. No, Grant admitted. But I can promise that I'll fight for you, and so will Ava, and so will everyone who knew what Rowan was trying to do. Ethan buried his face in his hands. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. You pulled a man from a burning car. You raised a son alone after losing your wife. You work yourself to exhaustion to provide for him. Don't tell me you're not strong enough. But strength, Ethan was learning, came in different forms. And facing down the fury of people who believed he'd stolen their birthright, that required a kind of strength he wasn't sure he possessed. The story broke 3 days later. Someone, probably Cassandra or Archer, leaked it to the press. By Thursday morning, Ethan's face was on the front page of every major newspaper in the state. Mystery heir, janitor inherits 500 bouncers' fortune. Whitlock children contest father's will. Who is Ethan Miles, the unknown man who inherited $1 billion empire? Ethan's phone rang constantly. Reporters, distant relatives he didn't even know existed, people claiming to be old friends who needed loans. He stopped answering, stopped checking his email, stopped looking at social media, where the comments ranged from supportive to viciously cruel. Good for him. Rich people's kids don't deserve everything just because of who their parents are. This is clearly fraud. No one gives away that kind of money to a stranger. Gold digger. Probably manipulated a senile old man. He saved the guy's life. He earned it. On Friday, Ethan went to pick up Leo from school and found a cluster of reporters waiting outside the gates. Cameras flashed as he approached, microphones thrust toward his face. Mr. Miles, what was your relationship with Rowan Whitlock? Did you know he was going to leave you his fortune? What do you say to accusations that you manipulated him? Ethan pushed through them, saying nothing, and found Leo's teacher waiting with his son inside the building. Miss Patterson looked worried. Mr. Miles, we need to talk. Some of the other parents there have been comments about Leo. What kind of comments? People saying that you're a con artist, that Leo will be taken away when you go to jail. The children have been repeating things they've heard at home. Ethan's vision blurred with rage. My son is 7 years old. What the hell is wrong with people? I know, I'm so sorry, but Leo came to me crying today during recess. He said some boys told him his dad is a thief. Ethan looked down at Leo, who was clutching his backpack and staring at the floor, his heart shattered into a million pieces. Come on, buddy, he said gently. Let's go home. They made it to the car before the tears came. Leo sobbed in the back seat, asking questions Ethan didn't know how to answer. Why were people being mean? What did he do wrong? Was Ethan really a thief? Listen to me, Ethan said, pulling over and climbing into the back seat to hold his son. Listen, none of this is your fault, and I am not a thief. I helped someone a long time ago, and he wanted to thank me, that's all. But everyone's saying I don't care what everyone's saying, I care about you, and I care about doing what's right. Can you trust me on that? Leo nodded against his chest, hiccuping. I trust you, Dad. That's all that matters. But as they drove home, Ethan wondered if trust would be enough. That weekend, Ava called. Ethan, I need you to come over. There's something you need to see. She gave him an address in the wealthy part of town, a penthouse overlooking the river. When Ethan arrived, she led him to a study lined with bookshelves and handed him a tablet. Rowan made one more video, she said quietly. He made me promise not to show it to you unless things got really bad. Well, they're bad, so watch. Ethan pressed play, and Rowan's face appeared on the screen. This recording looked different, grainier, more informal. Rowan was sitting in what looked like a hospital room, an IV in his arm. Ethan, if you're seeing this, then my children are doing exactly what I feared they would. They're attacking you, making your life hell, and you're probably wondering if it's worth it. Rowan paused, coughing. When he continued, his voice was weaker. Let me tell you something about Cassandra and Archer. When they were young, I took them to a homeless shelter on Christmas. I thought it would teach them gratitude, perspective. We served meals, and there was a veteran there, a man who'd lost his legs in combat. He was kind, grateful, told jokes despite everything. And on the way home, you know what Cassandra said? She was 14. She said, "Why should we help people who can't help themselves?" Rowan's eyes filled with tears. I failed her. I failed them both. I taught them that success meant crushing others, that wealth meant superiority, that kindness was weakness. And by the time I realized my mistake, they were already formed, already broken in ways I couldn't fix. He leaned forward, looking directly at the camera. But here's what you need to know, Ethan. 5 years ago, you didn't just save me from that fire. You saved Archer and Cassandra's uncle, my brother Thomas. It was 6 months before the garage fire. He'd been in a motorcycle accident on Highway 12, and you stopped. You pulled him from the wreckage, called 911, stayed with him until the ambulance came, and then you left, just like you always do. Ethan's breath caught. He remembered that night. Remembered the motorcycle, the blood, the man's terrified eyes. Thomas never told anyone except me, Rowan continued. He was ashamed that a stranger had to save him. But when I started researching you after you saved my life, Thomas recognized your name. And that's when I knew. You weren't a coincidence. You were proof that some people are just wired differently. Wired to help, even when there's no benefit, even when it costs them. Rowan wiped his eyes. So when Cassandra and Archer come for you, when they try to destroy you, remember this. You saved their uncle's life. You saved mine. You've saved dozens of people without even realizing it. You're exactly what this world needs more of. And if my children can't see that, then I failed them even more than I thought. The video ended. Ethan sat in stunned silence, his mind reeling. Ava was crying quietly beside him. I didn't know, Ethan whispered. I didn't know that was their uncle. Thomas died 2 years ago, heart attack, but he told Rowan about you, confirmed everything. That's what made Rowan absolutely certain. Does Cassandra know? Does Archer? Rowan wanted you to tell them when the time was right. Ethan thought about the fury in their faces, the threats, the way they'd frightened his son. And he thought about the man on the highway, bleeding and terrified, and how Ethan had held his hand and told him everything would be okay. "The time is right," Ethan said quietly. "Set up a meeting with both of them, tomorrow if possible." Ava looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm done running. I'm done letting them think I'm some con artist who manipulated their father. They deserve to know the truth. All of it." The meeting was arranged for Monday morning at Grant Hale's conference room. Cassandra and Archer arrived with their own lawyer, a severe man in an expensive suit who looked like he ate nails for breakfast. They sat across from Ethan, Ava, and Grant, the tension so thick it was almost visible. "This better be good," Cassandra said coldly. "We're very busy preparing to destroy your life in court." "I saved your uncle's life," Ethan said simply. The room went silent. Cassandra's expression didn't change, but Archer's face went pale. "What?" "Thomas Whitlock. 6 months before I saved your father, I pulled your uncle from a motorcycle accident on Highway 12. I didn't know who he was. I just knew he needed help." "You're lying," Cassandra said, but her voice wavered. "There's a police report," Grant said, sliding a document across the table. "Traffic incident, October 14th. Anonymous Good Samaritan rendered aid. Your uncle refused to give the officer Ethan's name, said he'd gotten his contact information for a personal thank you, but he told your father, and your father verified it." Archer took the document with shaking hands, reading it slowly. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "Uncle Thomas," he whispered. "You saved Uncle Thomas." "I didn't know," Ethan said. "I didn't know he was related to Rowan until I saw the video your father left me. I didn't save him because of who he was. I saved him because he was dying, and I was there, and that's what you do when someone needs help." "This doesn't change anything," Cassandra said, but her voice had lost its edge. "You still—" "What?" Ethan interrupted. "I still what? Manipulated your father? How?" "By living my life, by being kind to people, by doing my job and raising my son and trying to survive." "You don't understand what it's like," Cassandra said, and suddenly she sounded tired, lost. "To spend your whole life being told you're not enough. To watch your father build an empire and know that nothing you do will ever measure up. And then to have it all given to someone else, someone he chose over us." Her voice broke, and for the first time Ethan saw past the anger to the pain underneath. "He didn't choose me over you," Ethan said gently. "He chose to give me his money. But he gave you something more important. He gave you a chance to prove him wrong, to show that you're better than he thought, that you can be the people he hoped you'd become. By accepting that you deserve our inheritance," Archer's voice was bitter. "By accepting that maybe, just maybe, this isn't about deserving anything. Your father made his choice. And yeah, it hurts, I get that. But attacking me, threatening my son, dragging this through the courts, how does that prove him wrong? How does that show you're anything other than exactly what he feared?" Silence fell over the room, heavy and profound. Cassandra stared at the table, her jaw working. Archer looked at his sister, then back at Ethan. "What do you even want to do with the money?" Archer asked finally. And Ethan told them. He told them about Leo's heart condition, about the surgery they couldn't afford. He told them about the families drowning in medical debt, about single parents working 3 jobs and still falling behind, about kids who went to bed hungry, and elderly people who had to choose between food and medication. He told them about his dream of a foundation that could actually help, that could change lives the way Rowan's gift was changing his. When he finished, Cassandra was crying. Not sobbing, just tears streaming silently down her face. "That's what he wanted," she whispered. "All along, he wanted us to care about something other than money." "It's not too late," Ethan said. "You could help me. Both of you. You know how to run businesses, how to manage investments, how to make money work. I don't. I need help. And maybe this could be a way to honor your father. Not the man he was, but the man he wished he'd been." Archer stood abruptly, walked to the window, stared out at the city below. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Uncle Thomas used to tell me stories about his motorcycle accident, about the stranger who saved him. He said it changed his life, made him want to be better. And I never understood what he meant, but now... He turned back to face Ethan. My father was right about you. I hate that. I really, really hate it, but he was right. He extended his hand across the table. Ethan stood slowly and shook it, feeling the tension in Archer's grip, the grudging respect starting to form. Cassandra stood as well, though she didn't offer her hand. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said quietly. Or him. But maybe we can find a way to work together, for his sake. It wasn't a resolution, it wasn't friendship, but it was a beginning. As the meeting ended and everyone filed out, Ava pulled Ethan aside. He would have been so proud of you, she said. I didn't do anything. You did everything. You stayed true to who you are. That's all he ever wanted. Ethan drove home that afternoon feeling lighter than he had in weeks. When he picked up Leo from school, no reporters this time, thanks to the restraining order, his son bounced into the car with a big smile. Marcus said his dad says you're a hero, Leo announced. Are you really a hero, Dad? Ethan thought about Rowan's face in that video, about the man on the highway, about Ava collapsing at the funeral. He thought about all the small moments of kindness that had led to this impossible situation. I'm just your dad, he said. That's all I ever wanted to be. That's the best kind of hero, Leo said seriously. And maybe, Ethan thought as they drove home through the afternoon sun, maybe that was enough. The fragile peace that had settled over the conference room that Monday morning shattered exactly 17 days later. Ethan had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, things would work out. He'd met with Cassandra and Archer twice more, stilted conversations where they discussed the foundation, the logistics, the legal framework. Neither sibling had warmed to him exactly, but the open hostility had faded into something more like wary coexistence. Grant had assured him the will would clear probate within weeks. Ava had started showing him properties where the foundation could be headquartered. Leo had stopped having nightmares. And then Cassandra's lawyer called an emergency meeting. Ethan arrived at Grant's office to find the conference room packed. Cassandra sat at one end of the table, her expression unreadable. Archer stood by the window, his shoulders rigid. Their lawyer, Martin Voss, had brought 2 associates. Grant looked tired, like he'd been up all night. And at the far end of the table sat a woman Ethan had never seen before. Mid-50s, perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing a burgundy suit that screamed money and power. Mr. Miles, Martin said without preamble. This is Patricia Drummond. She represents the Whitlock Family Trust. I don't understand, Ethan said, taking the only empty chair. What family trust? The one your benefactor conveniently forgot to mention, Patricia said, her voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. Mr. Miles, I've spent the last 3 weeks conducting a thorough investigation into Rowan Whitlock's assets and his relationship with you, and I've found some very interesting discrepancies. Ethan's stomach dropped. What kind of discrepancies? For starters, there are questions about the timing of your interactions with Mr. Whitlock. Questions about whether you really had no idea who he was. Questions about whether this entire inheritance might constitute undue influence over a vulnerable elderly man. That's ridiculous, Grant interjected. We've been through this. Rowan was psychologically evaluated. He was of sound mind. Was he? Patricia slid a thick folder across the table. Because I have medical records here showing that Rowan Whitlock was diagnosed with early-stage dementia 14 months before he updated his will. Records that somehow never made it into your probate filing, Mr. Hale. The room erupted. Grant was on his feet, his face flushed with anger. Ava gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. Archer turned from the window, his expression shocked. Only Cassandra remained still, watching Ethan with an intensity that made his skin crawl. That's not possible, Grant said, his voice shaking. I reviewed all of his medical records. There was no dementia diagnosis. Not in the records you were given, Patricia agreed. But Dr. Ellen Zhao, Mr. Whitlock's personal physician, kept separate files, private files. And in those files, there's a very clear diagnosis of early cognitive decline. Now, I'm not saying Mr. Whitlock was incompetent. I'm simply saying that a man with dementia who suddenly decides to leave his entire fortune to a stranger raises questions about his judgment. Ethan felt like the floor was dissolving beneath him. I didn't know. I swear to God, I had no idea he was sick. Of course you didn't, Patricia said, her tone suggesting she believed the exact opposite. Just like you had no idea who he was when you pulled him from that fire. Just like you had no idea he'd been watching you for years. It's all very convenient, isn't it? This is a witch hunt, Ava said, her voice trembling with fury. Rowan was sharp as a tack right up until his death. He and I had conversations about philosophy, about business strategy, about politics. There was nothing wrong with his mind. Then perhaps you can explain why he was prescribed Aricept 3 months before he died. Patricia produced another document. That's a medication specifically for Alzheimer's and dementia patients. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan looked at Ava and saw the color drain from her face. She hadn't known. None of them had known. Even if this is true, Grant said carefully, early-stage dementia doesn't automatically invalidate a will. We'd need to prove that Mr. Whitlock lacked testamentary capacity at the time he made his decision, and we have 3 neurologists ready to testify that based on these medical records, his capacity was severely compromised, Patricia interrupted. But here's what I'm proposing, Mr. Miles. We don't want a protracted legal battle any more than you do, so we're offering you a settlement, $20 million. You walk away, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and everyone moves on with their lives. 20 million, Ethan heard himself say, the number so absurd he couldn't quite process it. You're offering me $20 million to give up $500 million? We're offering you $20 million to avoid a lawsuit that will drag on for years, destroy your reputation, traumatize your son, and quite possibly end with you getting nothing at all. Patricia leaned forward. Think about it, Mr. Miles. $20 million is more money than you'll ever need. You could give your son the life you've always dreamed of. You could walk away from this nightmare and never look back. Ethan looked around the table. Grant was shaking his head slightly, a clear warning. Ava looked devastated, tears streaming down her face. Archer was staring at his sister with something like betrayal in his eyes. And Cassandra was watching Ethan with an expression he couldn't read. Did you know about this? Archer asked his sister, his voice low and dangerous. Did you know about the dementia? I knew Dad was forgetting things, Cassandra said quietly. Little things, names, appointments, but I thought it was just age. You thought it was age, or you hoped it was dementia so you could use it against him? That's not fair, Archer. Isn't it? Because it seems like the moment we started to accept this, the moment we started to think maybe Dad knew what he was doing, you went and hired someone to dig up dirt. I'm protecting our family's legacy. No, Archer said, his voice breaking. You're proving Dad right about us. He walked out, the door slamming behind him. In the ringing silence, Patricia gathered her papers with the satisfied air of someone who'd just won a major victory. You have 72 hours to accept the settlement, Mr. Miles. After that, we file suit. And trust me, you don't want to see what we've prepared. She stood, nodded to Cassandra, and left with her associates in tow. Cassandra remained seated, her hands folded on the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't want to do this. Then why did you? Ava demanded. Because I'm terrified. Cassandra's composure cracked, her voice rising. I'm terrified that my father was right about me, that I'm exactly as shallow and money-hungry and broken as he thought. And if I let this go, if I just accept that he chose a stranger over his own daughter, then what does that say about who I am? It says you're human, Ethan said quietly. It says you're hurt. But Cassandra, destroying me won't fix what's broken between you and your father. He's gone. And whether I take this money or walk away, that won't change. You don't understand what it's like, Cassandra said, and now she was crying openly. Every achievement, every success, every time I tried to make him proud, it was never enough. Do you know what he said to me when I made my first million? I was 26 years old, and I was so excited to tell him. And he said, That's nice, Cassandra. Let me know when you've made something that matters. She pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking. And now he's given away everything to prove that I don't matter, that I never mattered. Ethan felt a strange surge of sympathy for this woman who'd threatened him, who'd tried to destroy his life, Because underneath all the anger and the legal maneuvering, she was just someone desperate for a father's love she'd never received. He left you $20 million, Ethan said. And more than that, he left you a chance to prove him wrong. But you won't do that by taking down everyone around you. You'll do it by becoming someone who doesn't need to. Cassandra looked at him through her tears, and for a moment something shifted in her expression. But then she stood abruptly, wiped her eyes, and walked out without another word. Grant waited until the door closed before turning to Ethan. We need to talk about this dementia diagnosis. If it's legitimate, it doesn't matter, Ethan interrupted. Ethan, it matters a great deal. This could invalidate the entire will. Then maybe it should. What? Ava looked at him in disbelief. Ethan, no. Rowan wanted you to have this money. He was clear about that. Was he? Or was he confused? What if he did have dementia? What if he wasn't thinking clearly? How can I take $500 million knowing that? Because he chose you long before any diagnosis, Grant said firmly. Mr. Miles, I've reviewed the timeline carefully. Rowan first started watching you 3 years ago, long before any cognitive decline. He made his decision to change his will 18 months ago. And yes, he was diagnosed with early-stage dementia 14 months ago, but the will was already being drafted. The diagnosis didn't change his mind. It just happened to coincide with his planning. That's a hell of a coincidence, Ethan muttered. Life is full of coincidences. That doesn't make them conspiracies. Grant pulled out his own file. I've been doing some research of my own. Early-stage dementia doesn't necessarily impair judgment or decision-making, especially not about long-term choices. Many people with the condition remain perfectly capable of managing their affairs for years. And Rowan's own doctor, this Dr. Zhao, has a note in the file that says, and I quote, "Patient remains sharp and focused on matters of importance. Cognitive decline minimal and primarily affecting short-term memory, not reasoning or judgment." Will Patricia Drummond's neurologists agree with that assessment? Ethan asked. Probably not, but we'll have our own experts. And we'll win, Ethan. I'm confident of that. At what cost? Ethan stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Somewhere down there, Leo was in school, learning about fractions or the solar system or whatever 7-year-olds learned on Wednesday afternoons. Somewhere down there, people were living normal lives, unburdened by impossible inheritances and legal battles with billionaires. Grant, if we fight this, it could take years. Years of my son seeing his father dragged through the mud. Years of headlines and speculation and people thinking I manipulated a sick old man. Is that really what Rowan would have wanted? He wanted you to be brave, Ava said softly. He knew this would be hard, but he believed in you. Maybe he believed in someone I'm not. Ethan left the office without making a decision. He picked up Leo from school, took him out for pizza even though they couldn't really afford it, and listened to his son talk about his day with an ache in his chest that felt like it might tear him apart. After Leo was asleep that night, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a glass of cheap whiskey and Patricia Drummond's settlement offer. $20 million. It was written there in black and white, along with all the legal language about non-disclosure and release of claims. $20 million to walk away from the hardest thing he'd ever had to do. He could give Leo everything. The surgery he needed, a good school, college, a house with a yard, security and safety, and a future that didn't involve his father working himself to death for minimum wage. $20 million could change their lives just as completely as $500 million, without the weight of expectation and responsibility. But it would also mean giving up on Rowan's dream. It would mean letting Cassandra and Patricia and everyone else believe that he'd been a con artist all along, someone who took the settlement because he knew he couldn't win in court. It would mean teaching Leo that sometimes, even when you're right, it's easier to just give up. Ethan was still sitting there at 3 a.m. when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. It was an unknown number, but something made him pick up. Mr. Miles? The voice was unfamiliar, elderly, with a slight tremor. My name is Ellen Zhao. I was Rowan Whitlock's physician. Ethan sat up straight. Dr. Zhao, I've heard about your files. Yes, I imagine you have. Patricia Drummond came to see me last week. She was very interested in Rowan's dementia diagnosis. Dr. Zhao paused. Mr. Miles, I want you to know something. Rowan knew about his diagnosis. He knew what it meant. And he specifically asked me to keep it private because he didn't want his children using it as ammunition. They're using it anyway. I know. And that's why I'm calling, because what Patricia didn't tell you is that I have another file. One that documents every conversation I had with Rowan about his will, about you, about his wishes. And in every single one of those conversations, he was lucid, articulate, and absolutely certain about what he wanted to do. Would you testify to that? I would. But Mr. Miles, I need to tell you something else. The dementia was progressing faster than we'd expected. Rowan knew he didn't have much time left to be himself. That's why he rushed the will, why he set up the test at his funeral. He was racing against his own mind, trying to secure his legacy before he lost the capacity to do so. Ethan felt tears burning his eyes. He must have been terrified. He was. But he said you gave him courage. He said if you could face every day with kindness, despite everything you'd been through, then he could face his own mortality with grace. Doctor. Chao's voice softened. He wasn't a perfect man, Mr. Miles. But in the end, he tried to do something good. Don't let his children take that away from him. After the call ended, Ethan sat in the darkness of his kitchen, thinking about Rowan racing against time, about a man trying desperately to fix his mistakes before his mind betrayed him. And he thought about what it meant to honor someone's dying wish, even when that wish felt impossible to fulfill. The next morning, Ethan called Grant. I'm not taking the settlement. Are you sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Within hours, Patricia Drummond filed her lawsuit. The headlines hit the evening news cycle with devastating efficiency. Dementia revelation rocks Whitlock inheritance case. Did billionaire Rowan Whitlock have capacity to change will? Medical records suggest confusion in final years of Tycoon's life. Ethan's phone exploded with messages, most of them ugly. His coworkers at the cemetery started treating him differently, their conversation stopping when he entered the break room. Mrs. Chen still smiled at him, but he could see the questions in her eyes. And at school, Leo came home with a black eye and wouldn't say who'd hit him. Some of the kids say you tricked the old man, Leo finally admitted, lying in bed that night with an ice pack pressed to his face. They say you're going to jail. I'm not going to jail, buddy. Promise? Ethan wanted to promise, wanted to guarantee that everything would be okay. But he'd learned not to make promises he might not be able to keep. I promise I'll always fight for us, he said instead, no matter what. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Grant spent hours preparing Ethan, running through potential questions, teaching him how to stay calm under pressure. Ava visited regularly, bringing food and encouragement, her pregnancy now in its final weeks. Archer called once, asking if there was anything he could do to help, his voice heavy with guilt about his sister's actions. But Cassandra stayed silent, invisible behind her walls of lawyers in righteous fury. On the morning of the hearing, Ethan put on the one suit he owned, a cheap thing he'd bought for his wife's funeral 6 years ago, and drove to the courthouse with Grant. The steps were packed with reporters, cameras, protesters on both sides. Some held signs supporting him. Kindness matters and heroes deserve recognition. Others condemned him. Justice for the Whitlock family and no inheritance for frauds. Inside, the courtroom was cold and austere. Cassandra sat at the plaintiff's table with Patricia and a team of associates. Archer wasn't there. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Barbara Reeves, looked like she'd heard every excuse in the world and believed none of them. This is a preliminary hearing regarding the estate of Rowan Whitlock, Judge Reeves said. Ms. Drummond, you may present your opening statement. Patricia stood, every inch the polished litigator. For 20 minutes, she painted a picture of Rowan Whitlock as a confused old man, manipulated by a cunning opportunist who'd orchestrated a series of convenient rescues. She presented the medical records, the dementia diagnosis, the prescription history. She brought in a neurologist who testified that based on the records alone, Rowan's judgment was likely compromised. She made it sound like Ethan had planned the whole thing from the beginning, a long con executed with ruthless precision. When she finished, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Ethan felt sick. Even he was starting to believe he might be guilty of something. Then Grant stood. He was older than Patricia, less flashy, but there was a quiet power in the way he commanded the room. Your Honor, the picture Ms. Drummond has painted is compelling. It's also almost entirely fiction. Grant pulled out a thick binder. These are Rowan Whitlock's personal journals, kept meticulously over the last 5 years of his life. In them, he documents not just his observations of Mr. Miles, but his own thought processes, his reasoning, his fears about his children, and his hopes for his legacy. I'd like to read just one entry, dated 3 months before his death. Judge Reeves nodded, and Grant opened the journal. Today I learned that Ethan helped Mrs. Chen, his elderly neighbor, when her water heater burst. He not only fixed it himself, but paid for the parts out of his own pocket, even though I know from watching his finances that he can barely afford groceries. Mrs. Chen told her daughter that Ethan refused payment, said she'd done enough by watching his son. This is who he is, not calculated, not manipulative, just genuinely, impossibly good. I wish I had been this man. I wish my children could be this man. But since they can't, I'll give him the tools to change the world in the way I never could. My mind may be failing, but my heart knows this is right. The courtroom was silent. Grant looked up at the judge. This isn't a story about a con artist, Your Honor. This is a story about a dying man who found someone worth believing in. And yes, he had early-stage dementia, but he also had clarity about what mattered. And what mattered to him was ensuring that his fortune would be used for good, not squandered by children he'd failed to raise with empathy. That's a narrative, Your Honor, Patricia objected, not evidence. Then let's talk about evidence, Grant said. Dr. Ellen Zhao is here today. She's prepared to testify that Rowan Whitlock was fully competent when he made his will, that every conversation they had about his estate showed clear reasoning and sound judgment. And furthermore, Miles himself has evidence that corroborates his account of events. Grant gestured, and an assistant brought forward a laptop. Security footage from the parking garage fire 5 years ago. Security footage from the highway where he saved Thomas Whitlock. Security footage from the cemetery on the day of the funeral. Every single moment that Rowan Whitlock cited as evidence of Mr. Miles's character captured on camera. No conspiracy, no manipulation, just a man living his life, helping people because that's who he is. Judge Reeves leaned forward. I'd like to see that footage. For the next hour, the courtroom watched Ethan's life unfold on screens. They watched him pull Rowan from the burning car, his face covered in soot, coughing violently as he performed CPR. They watched him stop on the highway to help Thomas, holding the injured man's hand while they waited for the ambulance. They watched him catch Ava at the funeral, the gentleness in his movements, the concern in his expression. It was strange, seeing himself from outside, watching these moments he barely remembered given weight and meaning. When the footage ended, Judge Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at Cassandra. Ms. Whitlock, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want an honest answer. Do you genuinely believe Mr. Miles manipulated your father? Or do you believe your father made a choice you don't agree with? Cassandra stood slowly. Every eye in the courtroom was on her. Ethan saw her hands shaking, saw the way she gripped the table for support. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what I believe anymore. Then perhaps you should withdraw your contest, Judge Reeves said gently. Because this court cannot invalidate a will based on your uncertainty. If you have concrete evidence of undue influence or lack of capacity, present it. Otherwise, I'm inclined to let your father's wishes stand. Patricia immediately leaned over, whispering urgently in Cassandra's ear. Ethan watched emotions flicker across Cassandra's face. Anger, grief, something that might have been relief. Finally, she straightened. I need to speak with my brother, she said. Can we have a recess? Judge Reeves granted 30 minutes. Ethan, Grant, and Ava retreated to a small conference room where they waited in tense silence. Through the walls, they could hear raised voices, Cassandra and Archer, arguing about something they couldn't quite make out. And then, 27 minutes into the recess, the door opened. Archer entered, followed by a red-eyed Cassandra. We're dropping the suit, Archer said without preamble. Grant stood. You're what? We're dropping it, all of it. The capacity challenge, the undue influence claims, everything. Archer looked at Ethan directly. My father was right about you, and he was right about us. We've spent the last month proving exactly why he didn't trust us with his fortune. Archer, you don't have to, Ethan started. Yes, I do. We both do. Archer glanced at his sister. Cassandra and I have been talking, really talking, for the first time in years. And we realized something. Dad didn't disinherit us because he didn't love us. He disinherited us because he loved us enough to try to teach us one last lesson about what matters, about who we could be. Cassandra wiped her eyes. I wanted to hate you, she said to Ethan. I wanted you to be a villain so badly because that would make this easier. But you're not. You're just good. Genuinely, annoyingly good. And I don't know how to compete with that. You don't have to compete, Ethan said softly. Your father left you $20 million each. That's more than most people see in 10 lifetimes. And he left you something more valuable, a chance to be part of something meaningful. The foundation I want to build, it's going to need people who understand business, who know how to make money work. I don't have those skills. But you do. You want us to help you? Cassandra looked stunned. I want us to work together, to prove that your father's faith in all of us wasn't misplaced. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Archer extended his hand, and this time, when Ethan shook it, there was no tension, only the tentative beginning of something that might, someday, become respect. They returned to the courtroom together. Patricia looked furious as Cassandra formally withdrew the contest. Judge Reeves accepted the withdrawal, praised everyone for coming to an amicable resolution, and then did something unexpected. She looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Miles, I don't often see cases like this. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever seen one quite like this. A dying man putting his faith in a stranger's goodness, that faith being tested, and that faith being justified. She paused. I hope you do something extraordinary with this gift, because the world could use a little more proof that good people still exist. I'll try, Your Honor, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. I promise I'll try. Outside the courthouse, the reporters swarmed again, but this time Cassandra and Archer stood beside Ethan and Grant, a united front. Cassandra stepped up to the microphones, her voice steady. My brother and I are withdrawing our contest of our father's will. Ethan Miles has proven himself worthy of our father's trust, and we look forward to working with him to honor our father's legacy. The questions came rapid fire, but Archer raised a hand. That's all we have to say. Thank you. As they walked down the courthouse steps, Ava caught up to them, slightly out of breath from the stairs and her pregnancy. She grabbed Ethan's arm, grinning through her tears. He knew, she said. Rowan knew this would happen. He knew you'd win them over. I didn't win anyone over, Ethan protested. They made their own choice. That's exactly what he hoped you'd say, Ava laughed. That night, after tucking Leo into bed and reading him 3 extra stories to celebrate, Ethan stood in his kitchen with a glass of water and looked around at the shabby duplex that had been home for so long. Soon, they'd move. Soon, everything would change. But for this one moment, he let himself just breathe. His phone buzzed with a text from Grant. Congratulations, the will clears probate next week. Get ready, Mr. Miles. Your new life is about to begin. Ethan thought about Rowan, racing against his failing mind to secure one final act of faith. He thought about Cassandra and Archer, choosing to let go of their anger. He thought about Dr. Zhao, calling in the middle of the night to tell him the truth. And he thought about Leo, sleeping peacefully down the hall, his black eye already starting to fade. I won't let you down, Ethan whispered to the empty air, hoping somehow Rowan could hear. I promise I won't let you down. And somewhere, he believed, a dead billionaire smiled. The money hit Ethan's account on a gray Thursday morning in March, 9 months after Rowan Whitlock's funeral. Grant had warned him it was coming, had walked him through the transfer procedures and tax implications and investment strategies until Ethan's head spun with numbers he couldn't quite comprehend. But nothing could have prepared him for the moment he logged into his bank account and saw that balance. $512,473,809.16. Ethan stared at the screen for a full minute, his coffee growing cold in his hand. The number didn't look real. It looked like a glitch, like someone had accidentally added too many zeros. He refreshed the page 3 times, and each time the number remained, solid and undeniable and absolutely terrifying. "Dad?" Leo called from his bedroom. "Can you help me find my math homework?" The ordinary request pulled Ethan back to reality. He closed the laptop, took a shaky breath, and went to help his son find the worksheet that had somehow ended up under his bed. Because no matter how many zeros were in his bank account, Leo still needed help with long division, still needed his lunch packed, still needed his father to be present and normal, and not completely overwhelmed by the weight of impossible responsibility. They'd already started making changes, small ones. A new apartment in a better neighborhood, though Ethan had resisted Grant's suggestions of mansions and penthouses. New clothes for Leo, though still from Target, not the designer stores Ava had wanted to take them to. And most importantly, Leo's surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks from now, the pediatric cardiac surgeon at Children's Hospital already reviewing his case. "We'll fix that heart of yours, Sec," the doctor had said during the consultation, smiling at Leo. "And then you'll be able to run and play just like any other kid." Leo had been so excited he'd bounced in his chair, and Ethan had excused himself to the hallway where he'd cried for 10 minutes straight, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude and the surreal knowledge that he could finally give his son the medical care he'd always needed but could never afford. Now, dropping Leo off at his new school, a private academy with small class sizes and art programs and a playground that looked like something from a dream, Ethan watched his son run toward his new friends and felt a peculiar mixture of joy and loss. This was what he'd always wanted for Leo, but it also meant leaving behind the simplicity of their old life, the comfortable poverty where at least he'd known the rules. "Mr. Miles?" A woman approached him in the parking lot, professionally dressed, carrying a tablet. "I'm Jennifer Watts from the Foundation Planning Group. Mr. Hale said you'd be here?" Ethan had forgotten about the meeting. In the chaos of the money transfer and Leo's school transition, he'd completely lost track of his schedule. "Right, yes, I'm sorry. I'm still getting used to all of this." "No apologies necessary. This is a lot to process." Jennifer smiled warmly. "I've been working with Mr. Hale and the Whitlock siblings on the initial foundation structure. We have some properties to show you today, potential headquarters for the Rowan Whitlock Foundation." They spent the morning touring buildings. The first was a gleaming glass tower in the financial district, 20 floors of pristine office space with views that stretched to the horizon. It was impressive. It was also utterly wrong. "I can't work here," Ethan said, standing in the empty top-floor suite. "This is too much, too corporate. The people we're trying to help, they'd walk in here and feel like they don't belong." "I told Grant you'd say that," a voice said from the doorway. Cassandra entered, dressed in a charcoal suit, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Over the past months, she'd slowly become an ally, though their relationship remained careful, marked by mutual respect rather than warmth. "I have another option. It's not as prestigious, but I think you'll like it better." They drove to a neighborhood Ethan recognized, the kind of middle-class area where families struggled but hadn't given up, where community centers hosted free dinners and churches ran clothing drives. The building Cassandra showed him was old, a renovated factory with exposed brick and high ceilings, the kind of space that felt lived in and real. "It used to be a textile mill," Cassandra explained as they walked through. "Closed 20 years ago. The developer who bought it went bankrupt, so it's been sitting empty. But the bones are good. 3 floors, plenty of space for offices, meeting rooms, a community area, and it's in a neighborhood where people actually need help." Ethan walked through the main floor, imagining it filled with life. Counselors meeting with struggling parents, caseworkers processing applications for medical grants, kids doing homework in a safe, warm space while their parents worked late shifts. This wasn't a tower where rich people dispensed charity from above. This was a place that could actually belong to the community it served. "This is perfect," he said quietly. "How much?" "Already purchased," Cassandra said. "Consider it my contribution to the foundation. 20 million buys a lot of goodwill, but it also buys a lot of real estate." Ethan turned to look at her, really look at her. The severe woman who'd threatened him in his doorway had softened somehow, or maybe she'd just let him see past the armor she wore. "Why are you doing this? Helping me, I mean. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." But Archer was right. Dad gave us a gift when he gave you his fortune. He gave us a chance to be better than we were. And I'm trying, Ethan. I'm really trying to be the daughter he wished he'd raised. I think you're doing a pretty good job. Don't get sentimental on me, Cassandra said, but there was the hint of a smile. We have a board meeting in 2 hours. Archer's bringing the financial projections, and Ava wants to discuss the grant application process. You ready? Not even a little bit. Good. Neither was Dad when he started Whitlock Industries. Apparently, terror is a family tradition. The board meeting was held at Grant's office since the foundation headquarters wasn't ready yet. Around the conference table sat an unlikely collection of people. Archer in his expensive suit, already deep into a spreadsheet, Cassandra reviewing legal documents, Ava, now 8.5 months pregnant, taking notes with fierce concentration, Grant presiding over everything with calm authority, and 3 other people Ethan had helped recruit, a social worker named Maria, who specialized in family services, a financial counselor named David, who'd grown up in poverty and understood it intimately, and Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatrician who volunteered at free clinics and wanted to expand access to medical care. Let's start with the mission statement, Grant said. Ethan, you want to take this? Ethan looked down at the paper in front of him, the words he'd written and rewritten a dozen times. The Rowan Whitlock Foundation exists to support families in crisis, with a focus on medical debt relief, emergency financial assistance, and programs that help single parents achieve stability. We believe that kindness is not charity, it's justice. And we believe that everyone deserves a chance to build a life of dignity. That's beautiful, Maria said. But we need to be more specific about implementation. How do we decide who gets help? What are our criteria? How do we prevent fraud without creating barriers? For the next 3 hours, they debated and discussed and sometimes argued. Archer wanted strict financial vetting to ensure money was used appropriately. Maria argued that strict vetting would discourage the people who needed help most. Cassandra worried about legal liability. Ava insisted they needed to trust people's inherent goodness. David pointed out that good intentions didn't pay the bills and they needed sustainable systems. Ethan mostly listened, overwhelmed by the complexity of turning good intentions into actual change. Finally, during a pause, he spoke up. I think we're overthinking this. When I helped Rowan, I didn't run a background check. When I helped your uncle, I didn't ask for his credit score. I just helped because someone needed help. Can't we start there and build systems around that instead of building systems that get in the way? The room went quiet. Then Archer leaned back in his chair and laughed, a genuine sound of surprised delight. That's either the most naive thing I've ever heard or the most brilliant. I honestly can't tell which. Why can't it be both? Ava suggested. We start with trust, with accessibility, with making it easy for people to ask for help. And then we learn as we go, adjust as needed. Yes, some people might take advantage, but how many more people will we help by not making them jump through hoops? They voted on it. 6 in favor, 1 abstention from Grant, who said as the attorney he couldn't endorse anything without proper safeguards, but he'd make sure they had the legal protection to try. The Rowan Whitlock Foundation would operate on a principle of radical accessibility. Anyone could apply, applications would be simple, decisions would be made quickly, and the default answer would be yes, unless there was clear evidence of fraud. Dad would have hated this, Cassandra said, but she was smiling. He was all about due diligence and risk management. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're supposed to do it differently. Over the next weeks, the foundation took shape. Contractors renovated the factory building, transforming it from an empty shell into a warm, welcoming space. Ethan insisted on details that made it feel human. Comfortable furniture, bright colors, a kids' area with toys and books, a community kitchen where people could grab free coffee and snacks. No marble floors, no intimidating reception desks, no sense that you had to be worthy to walk through the doors. Meanwhile, Leo's surgery approached. The night before, Ethan lay in his son's room watching him sleep, memorizing the rise and fall of his chest. The doctors had assured him the procedure was routine, that Leo would be fine, but Ethan couldn't shake the terror that had settled in his bones. You scared? Ava had asked earlier that evening. She'd come by with dinner, her pregnancy now so advanced she could barely move without discomfort. Terrified, Ethan admitted. What if something goes wrong? What if all this money, all this power to help people, and I can't even keep my own son safe? That's not how it works. You know that. Ava had taken his hand. You're a good father, Ethan. The best. And Leo is strong. He's going to be fine. When are you due? 2 weeks. Right around when Leo should be recovering. She smiled. I'm going to name him Rowan. I hope that's okay. I know it might seem strange, but it's perfect, Ethan said. He'd be honored. The surgery took 6 hours. Ethan spent them in the hospital waiting room with Mrs. Chen, who'd insisted on coming, and Grant, who'd cleared his schedule, and Cassandra and Archer, who arrived together bearing coffee and bagels nobody could eat. They sat in exhausted silence, watching the clock, jumping every time a doctor appeared in the doorway. Finally, the cardiac surgeon emerged, still in his scrubs, and Ethan's heart stopped. Mr. Miles, Leo did great. The repair was successful. He's in recovery now, and you can see him in about an hour. Ethan's knees buckled. Cassandra caught him on one side, Archer on the other, and he stood there between them, sobbing with relief while they held him up. These people who'd been strangers 9 months ago, who'd hated him and threatened him and tried to destroy his life, were now holding him together in his moment of greatest vulnerability. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for being here. Where else would we be? Archer said simply. Leo woke up groggy and uncomfortable but smiling. Did they fix me, Dad? They fixed you, buddy. Your heart's as good as new. Does that mean I can play soccer? Once you're healed up, you can play anything you want. Leo's recovery took 2 weeks, during which Ethan barely left his side. The foundation work continued without him, Cassandra and Archer handling the day-to-day decisions, Ava working from home as she approached her due date. Maria and David conducted the first round of grant reviews, presenting Ethan with a stack of applications when he finally returned to the office. We got over 1,000 applications in the first week, Maria said. Single parents who can't afford childcare, families drowning in medical bills, people who just need a little help to get back on their feet. Ethan read through them, each story a mirror of his own struggles. A woman whose husband had died, leaving her with 3 kids and no insurance. A man working 2 jobs who still couldn't afford his daughter's insulin. A family 1 car accident away from homelessness. These weren't abstract statistics. These were real people, living the life he would have lived without Rowan's impossible gift. Approve them, he said. All of them. Ethan, that's over $15 million in the first round. We have $500 million. We can afford 15. Approve them all. The first grants went out in April. The letters were simple, personal, explaining that the Rowan Whitlock Foundation existed to help, no strings attached. Within days, the responses started coming in. Letters and emails and phone calls from people who couldn't believe it was real, who cried with relief, who said they'd lost faith in humanity, and here was proof that good still existed. Ethan read every single one. A mother who could finally afford her son's asthma medication. A father who could quit his 3rd job and actually see his kids. A family who could pay off the medical debt that had been crushing them for years. Each story was a small miracle, a life changed by Rowan's faith in a stranger's goodness. The foundation's grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday in May. The building was ready, transformed into exactly what Ethan had envisioned, a space that felt welcoming and warm, where people in crisis could come for help without shame. The local news had picked up the story, and a small crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Ethan stood at the podium, looking out at the faces assembled there. Families who'd received grants, community members curious about this new resource, reporters with cameras, and in the front row, Leo, fully recovered now, bouncing with energy, sat next to Mrs. Chen. Beside them were Cassandra and Archer, and Ava holding tiny Rowan, just 2 weeks old, swaddled in a blue blanket. 9 months ago, Ethan began, his voice shaking slightly, a man I'd never consciously met changed my life. Rowan Whitlock gave me something impossible, not just money, but trust. He believed that if you give someone the tools to do good, they'll rise to meet that expectation. And I've spent every day since trying to prove him right. He paused, collecting his thoughts. But I've learned something important. I can't do this alone. This foundation isn't about me. It's about all of us. Every person who believes that we're responsible for each other, that kindness isn't weakness, that we're only as strong as our most vulnerable neighbors. So this building, this foundation, it's not mine. It's ours. And together we're going to prove that Rowan Whitlock's faith was justified. The applause was warm, genuine. As Ethan cut the ribbon and the doors officially opened, people streamed inside, exploring the space, talking with staff members, picking up information about programs and services. It was chaotic and beautiful, and exactly what Rowan had envisioned. Later, as the crowd thinned, Ethan found himself in the community area with Cassandra, Archer, and Ava. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching through the windows as families walked past on the street outside. "He'd be proud," Cassandra said quietly. "I spent so many years trying to make him proud through business deals and profit margins. And here you are, making him proud by giving away his money." "Our money," Ethan corrected. "This is all of ours now. The foundation works because we're all part of it." "I never thought I'd say this," Archer admitted, "but I'm glad he chose you. I'm glad he forced us to see what we'd been missing." "What's that?" "Purpose. Real purpose. Not just accumulating wealth for the sake of it, but actually making a difference." Archer looked at his sister. "We're starting a new initiative at Whitlock Industries. Every quarter, we're going to match whatever the foundation distributes in grants. If you give away $10 million, we give away $10 million. Consider it our way of continuing Dad's legacy." Ethan felt tears prickling his eyes. "That's incredible, thank you." "Don't thank us yet. You're doing the hard work. We're just writing checks." Cassandra smiled. "Though I will say, it feels better than I expected, writing checks to help people instead of to beat competitors." Ava shifted baby Rowan in her arms, and the infant made a soft cooing sound. "Do you want to hold him?" she asked Ethan. He took the baby carefully, supporting the tiny head, marveling at how light and fragile he felt. Baby Rowan's eyes opened, unfocused but curious, and Ethan felt a wave of emotion so intense it nearly knocked him over. "Your namesake changed everything," Ethan whispered to the baby. "He took a chance on someone nobody else would have believed in. And because of that, your mom will never have to worry about how she'll pay for your school or your doctor's visits or your future. Because of him, hundreds of other families won't have to worry either. That's a pretty incredible legacy for a name to carry." "He'll live up to it," Ava said confidently, "just like Leo is living up to having the best father in the world." Speaking of Leo, Ethan spotted his son across the room, showing Mrs. Chen the art supplies in the kids' area. He was explaining something with great enthusiasm, his hands gesturing wildly, fully recovered, and more energetic than Ethan had ever seen him. The surgery had worked perfectly. Leo's heart was strong. And watching him now, Ethan felt the weight of the past year finally start to lift. They'd made it. Against all odds, through legal battles and public scrutiny and their own doubts, they'd actually made it. That night, after the opening celebration ended and everyone went home, Ethan and Leo drove to Riverside Memorial Cemetery. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the grounds were quiet except for birdsong from the oak trees. They walked to Rowan's grave, a simple headstone despite his wealth. Rowan Whitlock, 1942-2024. Beloved father, visionary, friend. And below that, an inscription Ava had chosen. He believed in goodness. "Is this the man who gave us the money?" Leo asked, looking at the headstone. "Yes, buddy, this is him." "I wish I could have met him." "Me too, but in a way, you know him. Every choice we make with the foundation, every family we help, that's him living on through us." Leo was quiet for a moment, then reached out and touched the headstone gently. "Thank you, Mr. Whitlock, for helping my dad and for fixing my heart." Ethan knelt beside his son, and together they placed the flowers they'd brought, simple daisies, nothing fancy. As the last light faded from the sky, Ethan found himself talking to Rowan, sharing everything that had happened. "We opened the foundation today. It's beautiful, not in the way Cassandra and Archer would have made it, all glass and marble, but in the way I think you wanted. Real, accessible, warm. We've already helped over 1,000 families, and we're just getting started. Your children are amazing, by the way. They're doing the work of honoring you in ways that matter, and Ava named her son after you. He's perfect, healthy and happy and surrounded by love. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if any of this reaches wherever you are now, but I need you to know that I'm trying, Every single day, I'm trying to be worthy of the faith you had in me. And I promise I won't stop trying. Not ever. Leo slipped his hand into Ethan's. Can we come back and visit him sometimes? Absolutely, whenever you want. They stood there for a few more minutes, father and son, in the gathering darkness, paying respects to the man who'd changed everything. Then they walked back to their car, not the old Honda that had been falling apart, but not some ostentatious luxury vehicle either. Just a safe, reliable car that would get them where they needed to go. As they drove home through streets Ethan used to walk because he couldn't afford gas, past the old duplex where they'd struggled, through neighborhoods where the foundation would soon be expanding its services, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of challenge or worry. There would always be more work to do, more families to help, more ways the foundation could grow. But peace in knowing that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Dad, Leo said from the back seat, are we rich now? Ethan thought about how to answer that. We have money now, yes, but being rich isn't about what's in your bank account, buddy. It's about having people you love, doing work that matters, and knowing you're making the world a little bit better. By that measure, we've been rich all along. Even when we ate mac and cheese every night? Especially then, because we had each other, and that was enough. It still is, Leo said firmly. The money's nice, but you're the best part. Ethan's vision blurred with tears, but he kept driving, kept moving forward, just like he always had. Because that's what you did. You kept going. You helped where you could. You raised your kids with love. You tried to leave the world a little better than you found it. And sometimes, if you were extraordinarily lucky, a dying billionaire noticed and decided to give you the tools to help on a scale you'd never imagined. As they pulled into the driveway of their new house, modest but comfortable, with a yard where Leo could play, Ethan sent up one final thought to Rowan. Thank you. For everything. For believing in me. For giving me this chance. For showing your children what they could become. For proving that goodness still matters. And somewhere, in whatever place the dead go to watch over the living, Ethan liked to believe that Rowan Whitlock was smiling. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late October, exactly 1 year after Rowan's funeral. Ethan was in his office at the foundation, reviewing grant applications when his phone rang with the number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. He still got occasional calls from reporters or people asking for money, but something made him answer. Mr. Miles, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with the City Police Department. I'm calling about a case we're working on, and your name came up in connection with it. Ethan's stomach dropped. What kind of case? Nothing you're in trouble for, she assured him quickly. Actually, quite the opposite. Do you remember pulling a man from a motorcycle accident about 5 years ago? Highway 12? Thomas Whitlock. Yes, I remember. Well, we've been investigating a hit and run from that same stretch of highway, and we pulled traffic camera footage from around that time period. And Mr. Miles, we found something you should know about. The motorcycle accident that injured Mr. Whitlock? It wasn't an accident. Someone ran him off the road deliberately. Ethan sat down slowly. What? We have footage showing a black SUV forcing him off the road. The driver never stopped. We've been trying to identify the vehicle, and we finally got a match from the DMV database. Detective Martinez paused. Mr. Miles, the SUV was registered to Marcus Vance, who was the chief financial officer of Whitlock Industries at the time. He was fired 6 months before the incident for embezzling company funds. The implications crashed over Ethan like a wave. Thomas Whitlock's accident hadn't been random bad luck. It had been attempted murder, and Ethan had unknowingly saved him from someone's revenge plot. Does Cassandra know? Archer? We're heading to notify them now, but I wanted to reach out to you first because your testimony about what you saw that night could be crucial to the case. Mr. Vance is still alive, still in the area. With your help, we might finally be able to bring him to justice. After the call ended, Ethan sat in stunned silence. The story he'd thought he understood, random acts of kindness leading to an unexpected inheritance, had another layer he'd never imagined. Rowan hadn't just been moved by Ethan's goodness. He'd been grateful that Ethan had saved his brother from a murderer. His phone rang again. This time it was Archer, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. Did the police call you? Yes, just now. That son of a bitch tried to kill my uncle, and you stopped him. Jesus, Ethan, you didn't just save Uncle Thomas from an accident, you saved him from being murdered. I didn't know. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, because you're not the kind of person who thinks about things like that. You just help people. Archer's voice broke. Cassandra and I are at the police station now. Can you come down? They want to interview you formally, and I think we need you here. The police station was across town, a brick building that smelled of old coffee and institutional cleaning products. Detective Martinez met him in the lobby and led him to a conference room where Cassandra and Archer sat looking shell-shocked. Cassandra's eyes were red from crying, and Archer was gripping his sister's hand like he might fall apart if he let go. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Miles," Detective Martinez said, gesturing for him to sit. "I know this is a lot to process. Let me walk you through what we know." She laid out a series of photographs and documents. Marcus Vance had embezzled nearly $8 million from Whitlock Industries over a 3-year period. When Rowan discovered the theft and fired him, Vance had threatened legal action, claiming wrongful termination. The case was eventually settled quietly, but Vance had apparently held a grudge. The traffic camera footage showed his SUV deliberately swerving into Thomas Whitlock's motorcycle, forcing him off the road and into a concrete barrier. If Mr. Miles hadn't been there, Detective Martinez continued, Thomas Whitlock would have bled out before emergency services arrived. The blow to his head was severe, and he was losing consciousness fast. Mr. Miles's quick action saved his life. "And you're sure it was Vance?" Cassandra asked, her voice tight. "Positive. We've matched the license plate, and we have additional footage from earlier that day showing him following Thomas's motorcycle. This was premeditated attempted murder." Archer slammed his hand on the table. "That bastard tried to kill my uncle over money, over a job he lost because he was a thief." "We're issuing a warrant for his arrest today," Detective Martinez said. "But Mr. Miles, we need you to testify about what you witnessed that night. Every detail you can remember about Thomas's condition, what he said, anything that can help establish how close he came to dying." Ethan spent the next 2 hours giving his statement, dredging up memories he'd half forgotten. Thomas's blood-soaked jacket, the way his breathing had been shallow and ragged, how he'd gripped Ethan's hand and whispered, "Don't let me die here, please." The sirens in the distance, seeming to take forever to arrive, the paramedics telling Ethan later that 5 more minutes would have been too late. When he finished, Cassandra stood abruptly and walked out of the room. Archer followed, and after a moment, Ethan did too. He found them in the hallway, Cassandra leaning against the wall with her face in her hands, Archer standing beside her with his jaw clenched. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "I know this must be—" "Don't apologize," Cassandra cut him off. She looked up, and her expression was fierce, almost frightening in its intensity. "Don't you dare apologize. You saved him, Ethan. When someone tried to murder my uncle, you were there. You stopped it from happening, and you did it without knowing who he was or that you'd ever be thanked for it." "That's what Dad saw in you," Archer added, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just that you help people when no one's watching, when there's no reward, when you could just as easily drive past and pretend you didn't see. That's what made you different." They stood together in that sterile hallway, bound by tragedy and salvation, and the complicated legacy of a man who'd tried to fix his mistakes from beyond the grave. Finally, Cassandra straightened and wiped her eyes. "The foundation has been open 6 months," she said. "I think it's time we expanded. There are 4 other cities in the region that could use satellite offices, and I want to create a program specifically for crime victims, people who've been hurt by violence or theft, and need help getting back on their feet. We'll call it the Thomas Whitlock Initiative." "Your uncle would have liked that," Ethan said. "He would have loved it. He always said the worst part about the accident was feeling helpless. Now we can help people who feel the same way." Marcus Vance was arrested 3 days later at his apartment, where he'd been living under an assumed name. The trial was scheduled for the following spring, and the media coverage was intense. The story had everything: wealthy families, attempted murder, a mysterious hero who'd saved the victim without knowing someone had tried to kill him. Reporters camped outside the foundation, outside Ethan's house, outside Leo's school. "It's happening again," Leo said one night at dinner, pushing his food around his plate. Kids at school are talking about you, about us. What are they saying? That you're famous, that you're a hero. Some of them think it's cool, but some of them... Leo trailed off, looking miserable. Some of them say you just want attention, that you only help people so everyone will talk about you. Ethan felt a familiar anger rising. His son was 10 years old now, taller and stronger since the heart surgery, but still just a kid who wanted to be normal. And instead, he was dealing with the complicated fallout of his father's very public life. "Do you think that's true?" Ethan asked gently. "Do you think I help people for attention?" Leo looked up, his eyes, so much like his mother's, serious and thoughtful. "No, you helped people before anyone knew who you were. You still help people when no one's watching. Then that's all that matters. What we know about ourselves, what we know is true. Other people will always have opinions, Leo. We can't control that. We can only control who we choose to be." "Like Mr. Whitlock chose to believe in you?" "Exactly like that." The Foundation's first anniversary celebration was held in November, a subdued affair compared to the grand opening. They'd helped over 3,000 families now, distributing nearly $80 million in grants. Medical bills paid, rent covered, childcare subsidized. Single parents given breathing room to find better jobs or go back to school. Each number represented a life changed, a crisis averted, a family given hope. Ethan stood before the small crowd gathered in the community room, staff members, board members, some of the families they'd helped, and felt the weight of what they'd accomplished. "A year ago, I stood here and talked about trust, about believing that people are good, that they want to do better, that sometimes all someone needs is a little help and a lot of faith. And you know what? We were right. Out of 3,000 grants, we've had exactly 7 cases of suspected fraud. 7. That's a 99.7% success rate." The room erupted in applause. Maria, the social worker, was crying. David, the financial counselor, was grinning. Even Grant, usually so composed, looked moved. "But numbers don't tell the whole story," Ethan continued. "The real story is Rebecca Martinez, who was able to keep her home after her husband died. It's James Chen, who could afford his daughter's leukemia treatment. It's Sandra Williams, who went back to school to become a nurse because we covered her childcare for 2 years. These are the victories. These are the reasons Rowan Whitlock believed in this dream." After the speeches ended and the crowd mingled over cake and coffee, Ava approached Ethan with baby Rowan, no longer quite so tiny at 7 months old, balanced on her hip. The baby reached out chubby hands toward Ethan, and he took him, making silly faces until the child giggled. "He likes you," Ava said, smiling. "You're his favorite person besides me." "I'm honored. How are you holding up?" "Tired, happy, sometimes overwhelmed by single parenthood, which makes me think of you and Leo all those years and how strong you had to be." She paused. "Ethan, I wanted to tell you something. I'm starting a scholarship program, the Rowan Whitlock Educational Fund, for kids whose parents died young, like Leo lost his mom. I know money can't replace a parent, but maybe it can make the future a little less scary." Ethan felt tears prickling his eyes. "That's beautiful, Ava. Thank you. I'm just following your example, trying to turn grief into something good." That Christmas, Ethan hosted dinner at his house for an unlikely collection of people. Leo helped him cook, or tried to, mostly making a mess, but having fun doing it. Mrs. Chen arrived first bearing her famous dumplings. Grant came with his wife, whom Ethan had finally met after a year of working together. Cassandra and Archer arrived together, having apparently decided that holidays were better spent with chosen family than in their respective empty mansions. Ava brought baby Rowan, who was immediately spoiled by everyone. Even Maria and David from the Foundation stopped by, bringing their own families. The house was loud and chaotic and filled with laughter. At one point, Ethan stepped out onto the back porch just to breathe, to take in the impossible reality of his life. A year and a half ago, it had been just him and Leo, eating mac and cheese and trying to survive. Now his home was full of people he cared about, people who'd become family in the strangest, most unexpected way. "You okay?" Cassandra had followed him outside, wrapped in a coat against the December chill. "Yeah, just processing." "It's a lot to process." She leaned against the railing beside him. "You know, Archer and I were talking the other day about Dad, about what he would think of all this." "And?" I think he'd be amazed. Not at the foundation, he expected that to succeed, but at us, at the fact that Archer and I aren't constantly at each other's throats, that we actually enjoy working together now, that we've found something that matters more than money or status or beating each other in some imaginary competition. You give me too much credit for that. No, Ethan, we don't give you enough. Cassandra turned to face him fully. You changed our lives, not by inheriting Dad's money, but by showing us what it looks like to live with integrity, to make choices based on what's right instead of what's profitable. Archer's planning to step down as CEO of Whitlock Industries next year. He wants to work at the foundation full-time. Really? Really? And I'm restructuring our company's entire approach to corporate responsibility. We're creating an ethical board, implementing fair labor practices, increasing wages across the board, all the things Dad should have done but didn't, because he was too focused on profit margins. She smiled softly. We're trying to be the kind of people who would deserve an inheritance from someone like you. That's backwards. You already deserved it. No, we didn't. But we're becoming people who might. And that's the real gift Dad gave us. Not money, but a reason to become better. The trial of Marcus Vance began in March, nearly a year and a half after Rowan's death. Ethan testified about the night he'd saved Thomas Whitlock, describing in detail the scene he'd found, the desperate race to keep Thomas alive until help arrived. The defense attorney tried to shake his testimony, suggesting he couldn't possibly remember such specific details from years ago. I remember every person I've ever helped, Ethan said firmly, because those moments matter. They're not statistics or footnotes. They're human lives hanging in the balance. And yes, I remember exactly what Thomas looked like that night. The fear in his eyes, the blood on his clothes, the way he thanked me even though he was barely conscious. I'll remember it until the day I die. The courtroom was silent. Even the defense attorney seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Cassandra and Archer both testified about the embezzlement, about the threats Vance had made after being fired, about their uncle's death 2 years after the attack. A heart attack, the doctors said, though both siblings believed the trauma of the assault had contributed to his declining health. By the time closing arguments concluded, the jury looked ready to convict without deliberation. They were out for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, leaving the scene of an accident. Marcus Vance was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and as the bailiffs led him away, he looked at Ethan with pure hatred in his eyes. You ruined everything, Vance spat. If you'd just minded your own business, none of this would have happened. If you'd been a better person, Ethan replied calmly, none of this would have been necessary. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them with questions. But this time, instead of hiding, Ethan stepped up to the microphones with Cassandra and Archer flanking him. Today, justice was served for Thomas Whitlock, Ethan said. But this case isn't really about one man's crime or one family's loss. It's about the choice we all face every single day, to help or to hurt, to build up or tear down, to act with compassion or indifference. Marcus Vance made his choice. Thomas Whitlock made his. Rowan Whitlock made his. And each of us has to make ours. What's your choice, Mr. Miles? A reporter called out. Ethan smiled. I choose to keep helping, to keep believing that people are worth saving, to keep honoring the faith that Rowan Whitlock placed in me. And I hope that anyone watching this will make the same choice in their own way. Because we don't need billionaires leaving fortunes to strangers. We just need people willing to help their neighbors, to offer kindness without expecting reward, to be present when someone's life is falling apart. That's how we change the world, one act of compassion at a time. The Rowan Whitlock Foundation expanded dramatically in its second year. Satellite offices opened in 4 cities. The Thomas Whitlock Initiative helped over 500 crime victims. Ava's Educational Fund awarded its first scholarships to 20 students who'd lost parents. Archer came on board full-time, bringing his business acumen to the operations side. Cassandra restructured Whitlock Industries into a model of ethical capitalism, proving that companies could be profitable and principled. And Ethan, at the center of it all, tried to stay grounded in the simple truth that had started everything, that helping people was its own reward, that kindness was never wasted, that even the smallest act of compassion could ripple out in ways you'd never imagine. On a warm afternoon in June, 2 years after Rowan's funeral, Ethan took Leo to Riverside Memorial Cemetery. His son was 11 now, almost as tall as Ethan's shoulder, full of energy and life and the fearless confidence that came from having a heart that finally worked the way it should. They walked together through the grounds where Ethan had once worked, past the hedges he'd trimmed and the paths he'd raked. "Do you miss it?" Leo asked. "Working here?" "Sometimes. It was simpler, quieter." "Do you wish things had stayed simple?" Ethan thought about that as they approached Rowan's grave. The headstone looked weathered now, 2 years of seasons leaving their mark. Someone, probably Ava, had left fresh flowers recently. "No," he said finally, "simple isn't always better. And if things had stayed simple, we wouldn't have been able to help all those families. You wouldn't have gotten your surgery. I wouldn't have met Cassandra and Archer and learned that people can change, that enemies can become friends." They stood together in front of the grave, and Ethan felt Leo slip his hand into his. Not a little kid anymore, but still his son. Still the most important person in his world. "Mr. Whitlock," Leo said solemnly, addressing the headstone, "I wanted to tell you thank you for believing in my dad, for giving us this chance, and for showing me that one person really can make a difference." Ethan squeezed his son's hand, overwhelmed with pride and love and gratitude. This was the moment that mattered, not the money or the foundation or the headlines. This, teaching his son that goodness had value, that kindness was strength, that faith in humanity was never misplaced. "He would have loved you," Ethan said quietly. "He would have been so proud of the person you're becoming." "Do you think he's watching, like from wherever people go when they die?" "I don't know, but I hope so. Because if he is, he's seeing that his trust wasn't wasted, that the risk he took paid off in ways even he couldn't have imagined." They placed their own flowers on the grave, sunflowers this time, bright and cheerful, the kind of flowers that demanded you pay attention to beauty. As they turned to leave, Ethan glanced back one more time. "We did it," he whispered. "We proved you right. And we're just getting started." Walking back to the car, Ethan's phone buzzed with messages. Grant, sharing news about a major donor who wanted to contribute to the foundation. Maria, excited about a new program helping homeless families. Ava, sending a photo of baby Rowan taking his first steps. The world kept spinning, kept presenting new challenges and opportunities and chances to help. That evening, Ethan hosted a small dinner party, just his closest circle now. Cassandra brought wine and stories about Whitlock Industries' latest ethical initiative. Archer arrived with his new girlfriend, a teacher he'd met at one of the foundation's fundraisers. Ava came with Rowan, who was walking now and getting into everything. Grant and his wife brought dessert. Mrs. Chen presided over everything like the grandmother they'd all adopted. After dinner, as they sat around the living room watching the kids play, Cassandra raised her glass. "A toast," she said, "to the man who brought us all together. To Dad, who saw something in a stranger that he couldn't see in himself. To second chances and chosen family and the belief that people can change. To Rowan," they echoed, glasses raised. Later, after everyone had gone home and Leo was asleep, Ethan stood in his backyard looking up at the stars. Somewhere up there, maybe Rowan Whitlock was looking down. Maybe he was satisfied with how everything had turned out. Maybe he was proud of his children for finally learning what mattered. Maybe he was grateful that his final gamble had paid off. Or maybe he was just at peace, knowing that he'd left the world a little better than he'd found it. Ethan's phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Miles, my name is Jennifer Park. I received a grant from your foundation last year that saved my family from homelessness. I just wanted you to know that I'm back on my feet now, enrolled in nursing school, and I volunteer at the foundation every weekend. Thank you for giving me a second chance. I'm going to spend the rest of my life paying it forward." Ethan read the message 3 times, tears streaming down his face. This was it. This was what Rowan had seen. Not just the immediate impact of helping people, but the ripple effect. People who were helped becoming people who helped others. Kindness multiplying exponentially. Goodness becoming contagious. He thought about the scared, exhausted single father he'd been 2 years ago, working double shifts and wondering how he'd pay next month's bills. He thought about the woman collapsing at a funeral, the stranger in a burning car, the man bleeding on the highway. He thought about all the small moments of choosing to help, when it would have been easier to walk away. And he understood finally what Rowan had been trying to teach not just him, but everyone. That heroism wasn't about grand gestures or massive fortunes. It was about showing up, about being present when someone needed you, about believing that your actions mattered even when no one was watching. $500 million hadn't made him a better person. It had simply given him the resources to be more fully the person he'd always been. And maybe that was the real lesson, that goodness didn't require wealth or power or recognition. It just required choice. The daily, moment-by-moment choice to be kind. In his bedroom, Ethan kept one item from Rowan that Grant had given him, a handwritten note found in Rowan's desk after his death, dated just days before the funeral. Ethan read it now in the darkness of his room, the words familiar but still powerful. To whoever finds this, I've spent my whole life building an empire and destroying relationships. I've made billions and lost what mattered. But in my final days, I found someone who reminded me that it's not too late to do something right. His name is Ethan Miles, and he doesn't know I exist, but he will. And when he does, I hope he'll accept the burden I'm placing on him. Not the burden of wealth, but the burden of proving that good people still exist, that kindness still matters, that faith in humanity is justified. If you're reading this, Ethan succeeded, and that means there's still hope for all of us. Ethan folded the note carefully and placed it back in its frame on his nightstand. Tomorrow, he'd wake up and go to the foundation. There would be more applications to review, more families to help, more lives to change. Cassandra would call with ideas for expansion. Archer would send financial reports. Ava would stop by with Rowan, who'd probably destroy something while being adorable. Grant would have legal documents that needed signing. Leo would need help with homework and want to play catch in the yard. Life would continue, normal and extraordinary all at once. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of his room, Ethan simply whispered one final promise to the man who'd believed in him. I'll keep doing what you hoped I would. I'll keep proving that you were right. And I'll keep teaching others, starting with Leo, with your children, with everyone the foundation touches. That goodness isn't naive or weak. It's the strongest, bravest thing any of us can be. Outside, the moon rose over a city where thousands of families slept a little easier because of Rowan Whitlock's faith in one good man, where single parents didn't have to choose between medicine and food, where kids could dream about futures that seemed impossible before, where kindness had been given power and proven what it could do. And somewhere, Ethan believed, Rowan Whitlock rested easy at last. Not because he'd achieved redemption, that would have been too simple, too neat, but because he'd done something harder and more important. He'd planted a seed of hope and lived just long enough to see it start to grow. The story of how a single dad helped a pregnant woman at a funeral and inherited $500 million would be told for years to come. It would inspire some, confuse others, make people question their own choices and wonder about the power of simple kindness. But the real story, the one that mattered, was quieter and deeper. It was about a man who never stopped helping people, even when he had nothing. About a billionaire who learned too late what mattered, but still tried to make it right. About two children who found their way back to their father's better angels. About a community that rallied around the idea that we're all responsible for each other. It was about choosing every single day to be the person who stops when someone needs help. And it was about proving, one act of kindness at a time, that Rowan Whitlock's final belief was justified. That goodness wins. Not always immediately, not without struggle or sacrifice or doubt. But in the end, when the story is told and the ripples finally settle, goodness wins. And that, Ethan thought as sleep finally claimed him, was a legacy worth inheriting,